Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, senior editor at Forbes. Protests in Iran broke out at the end of December over the country's economic situation, but these protests have quickly grown way more serious. In fact, at this point in time, thousands, if not millions, of people have poured into the streets demonstrating against Iran's theocracy. At the same time, estimates vary, but upwards of thousands of people have been killed in these protests. Joining us to discuss what is happening on the ground is actor and activist Nazanin Boniadi. Naz, thank you so much for joining us. I have to ask, how are you?
Oh gosh, thank you for having me, Maggie. I don't really know how to answer that. I feel, you know, we're so far away, the diaspora so far away as far as geography from our homeland, but Iran lives within us. So the ebbs and flows of how we're feeling are so connected to what's going on the ground inside Iran. And it's been 47 years since I was born of nonstop turmoil and suffering for the Iranian people. So, to answer your question, not great, but I'm more concerned about what they're experiencing and how they're feeling. And I, I can't imagine the devastation on the ground right now and how alone they must feel behind the cloak of an internet shutdown, but also alienated from the world, but also forgotten in many ways.
You mentioned the internet shutdown, and I think it might be beneficial for our viewers if we just rewind a little bit, because at the top of this conversation, I referenced the economic protests
Yeah.
and what seemed to start as financial protests. This protesting the state of economic security in Iran has turned into something else. How did it get to where we are today?
So Iranians are not no strangers to uprisings. We've seen the student uprising in 1999. You've seen the Green Revolution, Green Movement of 2009, where they were calling for reform and where is my vote? And then you had in 2017, you started having anti-compulsory hijab protests, and then those were mixed in with some economic protests. And 2019, you had the Bloody November protests, in which 1,500 people were killed. Protesters were killed. Many more were executed. Many also were executed afterwards. And then you had the 2022 Woman Life Freedom Uprising, and which you and I have had conversations about before, where the central demand was, of course, centered around the killing of Masa Amini, who supposedly didn't abide by the compulsory hijab laws and was killed in custody. And then there was a massive uprising, and that was very much women's rights focused, and women were very much the driving force of that uprising and revolution. This moment started because in December 28th of 2025, in the aftermath of a weakened military in Iran, meaning after the 12-day war with Israel in June 2025, they lost a lot of their top commanders, military leaders. And in recent months, they've lost, and in recent history, they've lost their ally in Assad in Syria and Maduro in Venezuela. So that axis of resistance is falling apart. On top of that, you've got an economy in crisis, plummeting real, their currency, and a staggering inflation. I mean, 70% inflation on food, 50% across the board. It's staggering. The average Iranian cannot buy groceries. They can't access just the most basic things they need in life. There's staggering debt. That's what triggered the collapsing real, triggered the protests. But that very quickly snowballed into anti-regime demonstrations. And you mentioned thousands. Yes, it started with thousands in the capital, and it very quickly went up to the millions across Iran. We're talking, I think, 4 million across the country. And the very clear message is death to the dictator, down with this regime, neither Gaza nor Lebanon, my life only for Iran. It is a nationalist, Iranian nationalist movement in the sense that they are trying to reclaim the country from a theocratic system. They don't want the Islamic Republic anymore. So whilst Woman Life Freedom and all those other movements that predated this still hold a place and have sort of propelled us to this moment. This is very unique, in the number of people who are taking to the streets. They're in their millions and not just the tens of thousands. But also, there is no more demands for change or for reform. There's no, well, this is what we want from you. They just want this regime gone.
I was going to ask about the specific demands because I remember our conversations in 2022, 2023 about women, life, freedom, and that felt very different at the time. And you and others and I talked about, is this the moment? Is this the moment for change? And now we're more than 3 years past that, and the people of Iran are back in the streets calling for change. So is there a specific demand beyond death to the dictator? Is there an ideal new leader that is coming to the fore? Are there policy proposals, or is this just I shouldn't say just, but is this a surge of anger?
I mean, it's more than a surge of anger. There is a resounding name that's been chanted on the streets. There's only really one name I've heard, and that's the exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. And I think where that comes from is not only nostalgia for the past, but this sense of reclaiming Iran and its national identity. And that's really what his he's claimed he wants to do is to lead the country to a transition to a secular democracy, which of course Iran is a very diverse country. It's you've got minorities and there are pro-constitutional monarchists, there are Republicans, small r Republicans, there are very left and right and but there's one thing everybody agrees on, and that is they want a secular democracy. My hope is that if it's Reza Pahlavi or whoever leads any kind of transition, that it's obviously inclusive and that we are able to have an internationally monitored free and fair election so that Iranians can self-determine their future. But my goodness, with now reports of at least 12,000 Iranians massacred in the past few days alone, behind the curtain, the veil of this internet and phone shutdown, crackdown, and blackout, it just goes to show that we need, they can't do this alone. They are not armed. These are not people who, they can't take this brutality anymore. They've made it clear what they want, but now it's really up to the world to step up to this moment. The multilateral system has really failed. Not only the Iranian people, but I would argue Venezuelan people and others. How can we come together in moments like this? One dissident told me, Maggie, that when you're on the street and you're witnessing or you're experiencing a crime, you can call the police. You have somewhere to go. But in a country like Iran, the state is the criminal. Who are they supposed to call? Well, the UN. What's the UN going to do? You present it to the UN Security Council. China and Russia are likely to veto whatever action needs to be taken. We're back to square one. People getting slaughtered on the streets.
We're back to square one, and you just referenced one figure in terms of how many people have been killed just in the past few days. The estimates vary wildly. What will it take to stop the killing? What's your message to the international community? If the UN is not helpful, what are you as an advocate trying to convey to the world?
The first thing I want to convey is a country that knows, a government that knows it is representative of its people, that it's legitimate and accountable to its people, does not shut off the internet, does not cut the phone lines. They want people to communicate with the outside world. They want people to communicate with each other. If the government in Iran is afraid of that communication, it's because they have something to hide and they realize that they are not legitimate in the eyes of their people. So the reason that this blackout has happened for the past, more than a week, or it's been a week as we speak, but it will be likely a week by the time people hear us, is precisely that. They don't want the messages that we were hearing. Those videos are the authentic voices. That's citizen journalism, people getting us those videos so that we see and we don't turn a blind eye. Well, guess what? In the past week since the blackout, the narrative has shifted. The voices from the streets are not reaching us. The figures are all over the place, hundreds or tens of thousands, some saying as many as 20,000. The videos that have managed to trickle through because of Starlink show horror. It's horrific what I'm seeing. It's undoubtedly, I reported in the thousands before anybody had officially stated it, but I knew based on the videos I was getting, body bags, rows and rows of body bags at morgues, overflowing morgues, bodies being stored at warehouses, parents. These are people that can't even report the death of their children because they then have to pay for the bullet that killed their children to retrieve the body to be able to perform a burial. So they don't even report the deaths. So they're keeping their children, the corpses of their children in their homes. It's a crime. It's beyond a crime against humanity. This is a massacre and a genocide. I don't remember the last time, Maggie, that we've had reports of this many people being killed in such a short amount of time by their government, and for the world not to be outraged. So my call is, it's very simple. When the U.S. government and when the president of the leader of the free world says help is on its way, take to the streets and keep going, and that help doesn't come, that is more than just demoralizing. It's dangerous. People are being slaughtered because they've been emboldened to take to the streets. Of course, they were taken to the streets beforehand, but when you say help, it's on its way, well, you trust that help, it's on its way. You're about to get liberated. You give it all you have. You risk everything. And these people are being met with war bullets. And now I'm hearing reports of tankers it's basically under martial law in Tehran. That's what I'm hearing. And that help has not come. There are things that we can do that are immediately available to us. That we can. There are cyber operations we can take to conduct to take out critical military infrastructure, the Islamic Republic's critical military infrastructure. We can target the Islamic Republic's shadow fleet. 2 billion barrels of oil are being sent to China for a revenue of $40 billion a year. Despite sanctions. Why have we not managed to stop that? Why have we not found a way to make sure and ensure that Iranians have internet access? They've been blacking out the internet and shutting down the internet since 2009, and we've taken this long and still we don't have a solution for it. These are things that should have happened by now, and they haven't. And it's just devastating for the people of Iran.
Devastating is indeed the word. And I want to ask you, Naz, about a headline that I saw as preparation for this interview. NPR has a story up this afternoon that says the nationwide protests challenging Iran's theocracy appear increasingly smothered. That is an evocative word, but given the retaliation from the government against the people in the streets, do you agree with that assessment? Are the protests being smothered and shut down?
So people are still taking to the streets, but you're right in the sense that when help doesn't come and you're faced with a brutal dictatorship, of course they're gonna have the last say. The hope was this time, with the sheer number of people on the streets, that the world took their calls seriously. It's a form of a referendum at the end of the day in a country that doesn't have free and fair elections, where there is a dictatorship. You've got the longest standing dictator that's currently alive in Ali Khamenei, number one exporter of terror, number one executioner of its own people worldwide. This is not a surprise to us how they're trying to put down these protests. It's the only way they survive is through violence and brutality. My disappointment and my agony here in this moment is, why have we once again turned down, just let down the Iranian people in this way? The time for condemnations and polite statements of we're so sorry to hear that this is happening, and it's done. One dissident very clearly told me before we lost contact, right before the shutdown, a prominent dissident in Iran said, we want every powerful tool that the international community has to not only protect us, but help to end this regime. We want an internationally monitored free and fair election. We want to be able to self-determine. But when they're faced with brute force, there has to be a realistic way of, the right to protect these people has to exist. And why don't we have an international multilateral policy in international law that allows for that? In this moment that, every country, I think, should expel Iranian diplomats, there needs to be a tightening of course, every sanction possible to choke out this regime. Realizing, Maggie, that despite economic dire straits, you haven't heard one condemnation, one chant, millions of people on the streets, not one chant saying death to America by the people, not one chant saying death to America, death to Israel, to hell with these sanctions, we're suffering because of the West. It is purely Islamic Republic propaganda that sadly has been regurgitated by pundits in the West to somehow excuse the behavior of this regime. The time for reform is dead. The people of the Iran, clearly by Nobel laureate Nagiz Mohammadi, prominent dissidents inside the country, artists, the crown prince in exile, everybody, Masih Alinejad at the United Nations Security Council today. There are heads of Kurdish leaders, Abdullah Muhtadi, former Nobel laureate Shirin Ebadi. Everybody is saying the same thing. We don't want this regime.
You mention other advocates, other dissidents. You mention the exiled crown prince. I'd seen videos earlier this week and at the end of last week where that group seemed to be indicating that this time is different. But a lot can happen in a week. And it felt like where there was hope a week ago is I don't want to say gone, but it feels like we're sitting in a very different position right now. What happens next? I know you don't have a crystal ball, but based on what you've seen with past protests, what you've heard from the diaspora and other dissidents, what do you think comes in the days that follow?
Maggie, isn't it telling that in the past week or so that we have lost access to the Iranian people? We've had pieces of information and bits of video, again, through Starlink and satellite technology, but their voices really have been silenced. The voices that have prevailed in this past week are the regime voices, trying to do a PR crisis move of trying to get ambassadors for foreign countries inside Iran and show them that these were just terrorists that we were killing. These were rioters and terrorists, and we weren't shooting at people. It's completely shifting the narrative away from the calls of the Iranian people, millions strong. And it's sad and it's devastating actually for me to hear President Trump regurgitate some of that in, oh, well, I heard that they were shooting, protesters were shooting at at the security forces, and that's why they got killed. The only reason that that's been said is because the narrative right now and the videos he and others are being shown are from the regime. And so you silence the people, you spread the narrative of the regime, and all of a sudden in the past week, the news cycle has shifted. And if you've noticed, any promise to help the people they've backed away. Now, I hope I'm wrong. I hope that by the time we share this message, I hope that there is some kind of help on the way. It's not looking great at the moment. I don't know what more the people of Iran need to do to show that they don't want this regime. One thing that people have made very clear to me, multiple prominent dissidents I've spoken to have said, no more negotiations with a regime that does not represent us. That's the least we can do. But by all indications, that's what seems to be happening. I'm hearing rumors of various talks happening behind the scenes. I hope that that's not true. But at this point, my hope is to call on the international community, do the very least you can, expel the diplomats, or hold some kind of a demand, such as let in the Red Cross and Amnesty International and all these. And unless you do that, we will expel your diplomats. We will shut off diplomatic ties. You have leverage, use it. But sending them in, documenting these crimes is important. And if the regime isn't allowing that, why on earth? I mean, people say to me all the time, well, we need our ambassador there because that's our only way of keeping connected to what's going on in Iran. What good has 47 years of having your diplomats in that country done for you, for the Iranian people, the international community, for peace in the region and beyond? What good has it done? And it's a genuine question. What's going to change? What's required for you to change the way you view? There's an excellent piece by Steve Cook in Foreign Policy that came out today that exactly says exactly that, which is we need to shift the way we're viewing Iran, because we're using the same interlocutors, the same sources, the same pieces of information are getting to us, and we're not looking at Iran the way the people of Iran look at Iran. And until we do, we're going to get Iran wrong.
Talking about looking at Iran the way the people of Iran look at Iran, and talking about videos, I want to ask you about a few that have crossed my radar. And you're talking about some of the videos that appear to have been put out by the regime. There are a few other videos circulating. I saw one of a man in tears. He seemed to be in the back of a cab. I think he had gotten out of the country, but for regular viewers who are watching and who don't know if something's real or AI, how can the rest of the world know that what they're watching is accurate, especially if it comes from a firsthand account like the one I just described?
Yeah, usually I think if you follow accounts, like I try very hard to vet everything before I share. I don't just share. Some people instinctively just when they get emotional share things. I definitely try to vet things before I share them. So try to perhaps find accounts that you can follow that do that and that you can trust. You're right. We live in an age where it's impossible to tell what's real and not. There are signs though that we can look for when it comes to AI. Strange things happening in the scene, but also who shares it is hugely important. Who's your source? And if you don't know if the source is correct, maybe find a different source that is also sharing the same thing. But the video you mentioned is actually real. It's a young Iranian man who got to Turkey somehow amidst all this, but was describing the horrors that he witnessed. And he was pleading with President Trump and the international community to do something. He said, we can't do this on our own. The death count is horrendously high. And he described it as a living hell. And he had tears in his eyes. He was crying. And the number of videos and messages I get like that for the past few weeks, there have been countless messages, Maggie, and it's just, what are we doing? What are we doing? I mean, I honestly just want to tell the world, to my colleagues in the entertainment industry, I know you care. I know you've done it for other communities. You've risen up. 12,000 is a large number. We're thinking it might even be 20, but it's pretty certainly around 12,000. And I just haven't seen the outpouring of support that we've had for other massacres and other genocides and other atrocities. And so I am urging people to please, this is no longer about left or right, monarchy or republic or whatever ideology you hold. It's about humanity.
We've covered a lot of ground, and I know it's an incredibly heavy subject. Is there anything else you would like the Forbes audience to know and understand about what you're hearing from dissidents, what you're hearing coming out of Iran at this moment in time?
The only thing that I want to drive home is that this is a 47-year struggle. It didn't happen overnight. And despite propaganda, which is started by the regime and its apologists, this is homegrown. This is not something that is being led by any foreign influence. People have their agendas, of course, and people want to maybe claim that they started something. But having been in this space, in the human rights space, for 2 decades, advocating for the Iranian people's rights, I know how much they've done to get to this moment, how much they've sacrificed. And to attribute this to any foreign power in this moment strips them of their agency, is hugely demoralizing and highly offensive. So I just want that narrative to be corrected. This is an Iranian-born movement that has cost Iranian lives. and is continuing to cost Iranian lives. And the world just needs to stop looking away and find a solution to this to support them once and for all.
Nazanin Boniadi, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your perspective and your words. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Meg.